we'll be reading constitutional decentralization, that is local government. Okay, the 73rd and the 74th Amendment Acts have been the paradigm shifting kind of constitutional amendments wherein it created the third tier of local government. Okay, local government will enable local governance. That is what we need: grassroots democracy, participative democracy, these kind of things. Now, see, basically, rather than directly jumping to the 73rd or 74th Amendment Act, let's know a little about why exactly have we gone for democratic decentralization. What is decentralization? Because generally, what we know is centralization, that is, assumption of power. When a single body has all the power, we know power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So no one wants to leave away its power. Everyone wants to have his own share of power. That is what is happening now. Analyze it. There is Schedule 7. There are 3 lists: union list, state list, and concurrent list. See, the number of subjects in the union list has been increasing or decreasing? Increasing, despite having the Rajya Sabha, which is a representative institution of states. For constitutional amendment, you also need participation of Rajya Sabha, 368. But is Rajya Sabha really representing the interest of the state? If so, then why not the number of subjects in the list 2, that is state subject, is increasing? That is not increasing, that is decreasing. The number of items in concurrent and central list is increasing. Similarly, what you see there is reflected directly in a way what is happening in the 11th schedule. If the 7th schedule talks about subject items to be governed by center, state, or concurrently, the 11th schedule talks about 29 items that can be devolved to the third tier of government by the state. But that is the issue. Devolution index we will be reading. That is the issue. It is something like your mother-in-law syndrome. They got dowry, they said no, it's bad. But when the son was getting married, we need equal amount of dowry. So center is not giving autonomy and power to state. State is crying, I'm not getting any power. But when it is the turn of the state to give the same amount of or similar amount of power to the third tier, the state is not giving it. So that is the basic issue. That's why I said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay. Philosophically, you can say something like that. See, the whole problem is generally we think decentralization is a better mode of administration when it comes to functional democracy. I told you a term, functional politics, if you remember. While we were reading Parliament chapter, I told you a term, functional politics. What exactly is functional politics? When people are involved in the political decision making day in and day out, it is called as a functional politics. Generally, what happens in we are a part of the ballot box democracy. Once in a 5-year, we get up from the bed, go and cast our vote, come back. Then the government continues for 5 years. But does that make us a qualitative democracy? There are 2 terms: largest democracy, biggest democracy, US and India. Why large and why big? Because of quality and quantity. Getting it? So more and more of functional politics you have, more and more of qualitative democracy you have. In the 73rd and 74th Amendment Act, they generally try to bring in more functional politics. That is why they are important. That is why they set a different kind of a process. That is why we generally say it's a paradigm shift. Getting it? When you say it's a grassroots democratic process, it has to be something which is changing the complete paradigm. Paradigm from ballot box democracy to participative democracy. Once in a 5-year to every day. You see, the Gram Sabha will be acting on a day-to-day basis. Unlike you who goes to vote in 5 years' time. But this is the philosophical introduction of why there is need of functional politics or why there is need of democratic decentralization. Now, centralization, you know, let's read about decentralization. What exactly is decentralization? The transfer of authority and responsibility. It's transfer, not the other way around. The central government will transfer it to regional government. So basically, for decentralization to take place, there must be pehle centralization. So there is a body who has got all the power. Now what that body is doing, that central body is doing, it is decentralizing, transferring the authority and responsibilities to regional governments. Okay. Now, when you say decentralize, this decentralize is a very complex process. It is not a single kind of just transfer of some kind of a function from one body to another body. Rather, it is a multifaceted process. Multifaceted means it will include political decentralization. It will include financial decentralization. It will include administrative decentralization. Political decentralization means creation of political institutions who are capable of taking decisions at the regional government level. And they need not go to the central government to ask for a permission, like, should we do it? Should we take a decision? No. They are autonomous enough to take decision at regional government level. When I'm talking about financial decentralization, see, most of the funds or the most important kind of funds are always levied, collected, appropriated by central government. Because to get legitimacy of power, what is important is resource. Why would state be dependent on center? Or why in India state are weak compared to center? Or why in India it is center which dictates over the state? Because of two things. Number one is the planning architecture, and number two is the financial might of the center. So basically, since planning commission or post planning commission era also, the way in which development of the country would take place is decided, or maybe you can say dictated by center. Similarly, the most important of the items which give more and more of revenue is with center. So both planning infrastructure as well as the financial might, the power of money, lies with center. Financial decentralization means now that power to levy, collect or appropriate taxes to raise revenue, taxes or non-taxes revenue, that will come to regional governments. Similarly, administrative decentralization, which can have multiple kind of processes, including personal administration, people who will be posted to take care of administration at that particular point, or making bylaws. We read about a single concept, delegated legislation. That is a kind of administrative decentralization from the central government to regional government. Getting it? So it's a multifaceted process. Now, generally, when we talk about decentralization, political decentralization and financial decentralization are easy to understand. One is about creation of political institution, other is about giving power to raise revenue. But when it comes to administrative decentralization, you need to understand it, because many a time administrative decentralization will in itself be having components of political and financial decentralization. Getting it? It's a complex process. It's not like this is administrative decentralization or this process is only financial decentralization. It's a complex process. So political and financial are easy to understand. Let's talk a little about administrative decentralization. Okay. Administrative decentralization. This term is important, administrative decentralization. So what is it? It is the redistribution of authority, responsibility, and financial resources for providing public services among different level of government. So why are you doing administrative decentralization? To provide public services. And what are you decentralizing? What are you transferring? For what you are transferring the authority and responsibility? Yes. Okay. So when it comes to administrative decentralization, there are three terms that you need to understand. Okay. The first one is deconcentration. Just listen the example first, then you can connect it with the definition. Suppose you are sitting here at the New Delhi office and you got a lot of workload. What you will do? You will just call the Dwarka office saying, see, we have got a lot of work. You do some amount of work for us. And you will just deconcentrate yourself because of the workload. Is it really decentralization? No, it is not. But quantitatively, the unitary form of government, the one which are completely unitary, will always focus more and more on deconcentration. Why? Because all the power is always assumed in a single body, and that single body will never give up the power and authority it has. So what it will do? Deconcentration. Clear enough? The second one is delegation. Delegation is a step ahead from deconcentration. It's a little bit extensive in nature, qualitative in nature. Okay, what it does? It transfers responsibility, but the authority still lies with the central government. If you remember, there is a parliamentary committee on delegated legislation. Remember, we read about it? Huh? Delegated legislation means the legislature will empower the executive to make detailings of law, rules, regulation, bylaws, etc. because of its nature of 24/7 engagement with the governance process. That is what delegated legislation is. The legislature empowering the executive to make laws. It's a little bit extensive because you are giving away your own power to somebody else, but that is only responsibility transfer. Is the authority transfer? No. The Committee on Delegated Legislation will ask the minister, why have you formed these laws? Are these delegated legislations that the administration made, are they in conformity with the constitution? So it has got authority. When it is asking question, it has got authority. So responsibility was transferred, but the ultimate accountability still lies with the central government. Okay. So see, it's a journey from a unitary mode of governance to actually federal mode of governance, because the last one, which is the most extensive kind of decentralization, is known as devolution. What is devolution? Devolution is more qualitative in nature rather than the quantitative feature of deconcentration and delegation. What it includes? It includes transfer of both responsibility and authority. When you devolve power from the state to the PRIs are the ultimately responsible institution to take decisions on those particular subjects. Getting it? Devolution in itself, it includes political decentralization. Why? Because when you transfer authority and responsibility, you are transferring decision-making power. What is polity? The art of who gets what, when and where. It's nothing but decision-making. Got it? Even administration is nothing but a series of decision-making. That is what is the simplest definition of administration. It's a series of decision-making. Okay. So transfer decision-making, finances and management to a territory identified. You exactly know where you are transferring and not shifting. You are transferring the authority and responsibility. In both of these cases, you are shifting. In this case, you are shifting the workload. In this case, you are shifting the responsibility. But in devolution, you are transferring it. There is a difference between shifting and transferring.